morning. We are in Ephesians chapter 6. We're taking a look at the armor of God, chapter 6, verses 10 through 20. We're going to start with a little reminder of last week and get into the next couple of verses as we go through today. Today we're going to be taking a look at 10 and 11, and specifically talking about the section in there about the devil's schemes. Last week we started a new series from Ephesians chapter 6, 10 through 20, and I entitled it, Suit Up. I chose that title because I wanted to remind us that we live in a hostile environment, and we need the reminder to suit up in order to defend ourselves from spiritual attacks, and also to realize the weapons that we have and how to attack back. The passages that we looked at in verses 10 and 11 are focusing on the armor of God. But before we get to the specifics, which we'll be taking a look at each of the parts of the armor, we were looking at those first couple of verses here. If you're reading in the NIV, it says, "Finally be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." The study that I was doing through that, looking at the different tense of some of the words, led to a different interpretation, application of that passage for me. Because being a type A personality, the idea that, just buck up and take on and put on your armor, and that's something that you do, that checklist mentality, kind of fits well for me. But taking a look at how the original audience might have understood that, I came up with some different understanding, that the passage is much more reliance on God and who He is, and so the tense of those reflects that. Instead of just a finally, it's also a henceforth. Not just what I've heard before, but from now on. So that's why I started it this way, and my understanding of how to take a look at this. From now on, I will be strengthened by Jesus as I am under His control, and protected by His might. I have put on His armor and will continue to do so in order to take a stand against the devil's schemes. That seems better to me in understanding of where my part is and where God's part is in this. He's provided everything. My responsibility is I put it on once when I committed to Him, and I'll continue to do so. So how well did we do with that? Last week we considered how caught up we can be in making sure that we're safe in all the other areas of life, that we forget the spiritually hostile environment that attacks our morals, that attacks our ethics, that attacks our spiritual growth, that attacks our evangelism. God has enabled us to attack the devil as we serve the Lord as His soldiers. So I suggested a couple ways to put that into application. So how well did you do with protecting yourself from spiritual attack instead of focusing on the other aspects of safety? How well did you do with keeping first things first, to realize the spiritually hostile environment that we live in? How well did we do at showing Jesus that we trust Him as we daily put on the full armor of God and we head out to take on Satan? We realize how protected we are because of Jesus, and realize what the goal is to push Him back, to make sure that He can't take us because we work together as a group. We are protected by His strength. It's not something you have to develop within yourself. You are protected by the strength of Jesus. So this week we continue with the second half of verse 11 and verse 12. And here's the text. "Finally be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Within this section, we're talking about the devil's schemes. If you know who your enemy is, and if you know what tactics they use, you can be better prepared to defeat them. Is that true? In sports teams and coaches watch hours and hours of game tapes, analyzing not only how they played, but analyzing who they're playing against. Who are their strongest players? Who's on the injured list? Who's playing, who's underrated? What is the strengths of our game? What's the strengths of their game? And they work at this to try to pair it so that the strength of your team is stronger than the strength of their team. But they can spend huge amounts of time coming up with the right strategy for this right team. In that, it's if they do this, we will do that. If they play this person, we'll play this person. Kind of like a chess match. You make this move, I'll make that move. In games like poker, a key to winning is the tell of your other players. That's why I'm terrible at it. I can't lie worth anything. Just try it. Even fish. You can beat me at fish. A general rule in competition is to decide if you're going to play according to your strength and focus on your game, or are you going to work at adapting and playing to their style? Are you going to play their game better than the way that they play it? Here's the thing with the devil's schemes. When handling the tactics of the devil, we do well to play our game instead of try to outplay him at his. Who has more practice? You stick to your game. And what's your game? I'm going to put on the armor. I'm going to trust in Jesus. I'm not going to get into an argument with Satan. Why? He's pretty good at arguing. You just start talking to him at all. Just let him in. Just try to talk him down. That's what he loves. That's what he's wired for. That's the way that he is won constantly. Don't play his game. But here's the advantage. Because we have the Bible, we know of our enemy and we know of his schemes. One of the many great blessings of having God's written word is having knowledge about our enemy and also knowledge of the strategies. We've been given information about the devil that is relevant to our defending ourselves and relevant to us knowing how to attack back. It's through God's word that we learn to have many ways. We learn in many ways that the devil is predictable. Is he not? We can use that to our advantage. Let's begin with a few things that we do know about the devil. Maybe some of these you think of, and maybe some of them you haven't really thought of. We know that the devil is a created being. Why is that relevant? Because he is not immortal. The devil is created. He is not God. The devil is created. He's a fallen angel with the limitations of all angels. What you know about angels, you can apply to the work of the devil. He is not an opposite to God. It is not a yin-yang. It is not God is good and the devil is bad, the balance of right and wrong. That's not the way that it is. He is not the anti-God. Because he is an angel, here's three important differences between God and the angels. He cannot be everywhere. That is being omnipresent. But who can? God can be everywhere. He cannot know everything. But who can? God. That's omniscient. And he cannot do everything. That's omnipotent. God can be everywhere, know everything, and do anything. But here's the problem. If you apply those three traits to the devil, they don't apply. He can't do those things. The only way that he can do these things is having other people work alongside of him. Other created beings. So that's an important difference. We know that he is a liar and accuser. Did you know that neither devil or Satan are his actual name? Did you realize that? It's not until we get to 1 Chronicles 21:1 that the name, that title, is actually applied to him. It goes from being the accuser to accuser, where it becomes a personal name. Even when we're reading our passages, which today we're going to look at in Job, just because it's capitalized doesn't mean that that's what the term means. We've reversed it, but he is only referred to, in the majority of times, as the accuser, the adversary. We know that Michael, the angel, the archangel, has a name. We know the name of very few of the angels. But this is a term that references his character. He is the adversary. He is the slanderer, the false accuser. So that's important to know. So much so that that becomes what you're known for. He was defeated at the resurrection. When Jesus rose from the dead, that limited the power of the devil. So much so that his defeat has already been done. His time is limited. His judgment is coming. We read that in Revelation. And point number 7, he can be defeated. As many times as you read of the victories of the devil, you also read of the defeat. And we have warning in Scripture about what we can do. We can't use the term, the devil made me do it. Can you? You can join the devil, and he would like you to do it, but he can't make you do it. So what are some relevant passages? If we're going to understand our enemy, what are some of the passages in the Bible that we might want to consider? Well, here's a few of them. Some of them you might know, and some of them you might not. That's the difference in studying a topic. One of the first ones I want to bring up in the Old Testament is Zechariah chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. We're going to look at Job chapter 1 and 2, but in Zechariah chapter 3, 1 and 2, Satan is said to be standing beside and accusing the high priest Joshua. God is talking, and the devil, Satan, is there accusing the high priest Joshua. Beacon off. Just telling God that you shouldn't trust this guy. He's not going to do it. It's an interesting passage because that's the tactic. Satan is there to just cause a nuisance. He is always going to accuse. He accuses us one to another. He accuses even within ourselves with guilt and shame. And he accuses towards God. You don't think Satan has anything better to do than to say you shouldn't save that person. He doesn't mind spending all day to say they're not worth it. And that constant nagging accusation. Because it works. Oh, look at that. Here, can you run me back one? The other ones I selected were from the New Testament. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, 10 and 11. Forgive so that Satan will not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. In chapter 2 Corinthians 11, 12 through 15, that's the passage where we read that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. In John 8, 44, the devil is the father of lies. He says you lie because you joined your father in it. He's the father of lies. And one that gets a little, rolls off the tongue nice is 1 John 3, 8. The devil has been sinning from the beginning. These are passages, none of these passages are specifically about the theology or the understanding of the devil. These are all passages that are talking about something else that we find a little nugget of information. We don't have a chapter specifically dedicated to the teachings that we should understand about the devil. We read of this, don't get into the dialogue part again in Jude. In Jude verse 9, Michael and the devil disputing about the body of Moses. But that passage is about slander. You don't slander God. But we read that Michael starts talking to him, and then there's this dispute. Matthew chapter 4, the tactics of the devil during the temptation of Jesus. It's a relevant passage. 2 Timothy 2:26. It says, the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. That's important to realize too, that there are times and there are people that have joined the devil in his work, that he has trapped them into this unholy theology, this partnering, and so he just uses them to do his will. He can get people to join him in it, as long as they're willing to do a part of it. Our main one, 1 Peter 5:8, he prowls the earth like a lion looking for someone to devour. That was true then, and it's true now. But he can't be everywhere, can he? So he's got a lot of demons that are watching. He's got a lot of other ways to gather information. And that's what he does. If there's one passage about the devil that you need to know, it's James 4:7. Because it's the most relevant. Because it says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. In the simplest way, that's how we defeat the devil. Is by being surrounded, protected by God. But knowing these passages, knowing this information about the devil is helpful to us because we also understand who he is and how he works. In 1 Timothy 3:6 and 7, there's a warning specifically given to elders about being conceited. And then he says, live a life above reproach, because if you don't, you can be disgraced, and that's a part of the devil's trap. So specifically, the devil likes to take down eldership, spiritual leaders. Ephesians 4:25 through 27, anger gives the devil a foothold. Remember that? That's just before our section that we're reading at in Ephesians. In Matthew 13:19, talking about the parable of the soils, we have one of those parts that's specifically related to the work of the devil, where it says he works to snatch away the word of God placed in the heart of those before they understand it. Does he like that tactic too? Get to people before they can commit. Get to people while they're working out their faith. Attack the young. So because of this information, in Ephesians, before we get to the specifics of the armor, that's why we have the passage that we're looking at. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. So we've looked at a bit of that part about the devil and his schemes. The next part, verse 12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood. So if it's not against flesh and blood, what's it against? But against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That's kind of not fair, is it? You got two against one. There are parts of this world that are against us. That we live in a hostile environment because of the aspects that are involved in this world. We have rulers, authorities, and powers that can be on Team Satan, that are not redeemed by Jesus. Therefore, they are hostile to us. But we also, on the other hand, have another part of that team, which are the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. We have the part that we face on this earth and also the supernatural part of the attack as well. And it says that we wrestle is specifically the term, one side and the other. There's the enemy that you see and the enemy that you don't. But they all work together. That's the reminder that we are in a hostile environment. And that's why we need the armor. So as I've said, we're going to take a look at Job, one of the earliest writings, one of the patriarchs, about the same time as Abraham. And it's interesting because that old book, we have Job chapter 1 and 2, which specifically talk about the way that Satan is involved. Page 789, if you want to follow along in your Bible there. In Job chapter 1, verse 6 through 12 is what we're going to read with. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. And thus Satan, the adversary, also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Realize how old that is compared to 1 Peter? What have you been doing? Just going about the earth. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Here's what I want you to catch into with verse 8. How well does that passage apply to you? Here is my servant, insert your name. Blameless and upright. A man who fears God and shuns evil. So that's the type of lifestyle that we're supposed to live. The result of that is that our faith can be tested. But you'll notice that it's God that brings it up. Have you considered Job? And what happens from this verse on? Well, 9 through 12. If you get into a discussion with the devil, he's going to answer. Is he not? And what is he going to say? Accusation. He's the adversary. He's going to accuse. Have you considered Job? You take it too easy on him. The only reason he's blameless as upright is because you've blessed him. You take too good care of him. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? Have you blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land? That's why he blesses you. That's why Job trusts in you. So why don't you change things up? Verse 11, "But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, then he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And what do you think follows after that? You can touch anything in his life, but do not touch him physically. So what's the next thing that Satan does? Destroys his family, destroys his income, takes everything away from him in his life. Our focus isn't today on Job and how Job responds, but on what Satan can do and who he is, what his schemes are. It doesn't end there. In chapter 2, in all of this, Job does not sin by blaming the Lord, right? That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, Job goes through some rough times. A lot of loss, and very immediate. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." Even God says, "You incited me." I was pointing them out. You said, let's make it. Let's try it. Let's test it. Maybe that wasn't God's intent in pointing them out. But you incited me to test him, and I did. You incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. The discussion doesn't stop there. In verse 4. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. That's because you didn't let me touch him physically. He's only upright and blameless, and he hasn't turned on you because you wouldn't let me touch him. You wouldn't let me actually damage his health. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. And so he does. But he sure takes him to the brink. He makes his physical health very challenging. So what do we learn in something like that? How do we apply both of these passages and put the thoughts together? Well, it reminds us it doesn't matter where you look, the same teaching is true. He is an angel, so he has the limits of an angel. But in these, we realize he roams the earth, he is the accuser, he changes tactics if need be. He will attack those around us, and he will attack our health. The two major ways that he brings down people of faith. Now, if you allow him to attack your integrity, that's the easy way. Did you notice that he has to ask permission? He has to ask permission, and he has to ask permission to the extent that he can cause destruction. So why is it that there is so much pain and damage? Here's the qualifier for that. He only has to ask permission if we haven't agreed to work with him. You see that? If you want to do what the devil wants you to do, can God keep you from doing it? No. So all he has to do is make it sound like that's the better choice. And God cannot protect you from your own poor decisions. As an angel, he has access to great power, does he not? How long did it take him to destroy Job's family? A day. Yes. It was one report after the other after the other. How long did it take him to infect his health? It was immediate. How many angels were sent as the angel of death with the Exodus? One. So if the devil gets to use his powers, even as an angel, he has a lot more power than what you do. But God can limit the scope of his destruction. So do you need armor? Yes. This is why our passage says what it says and provides some so that. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. That's next. He can't make you put the armor on, but he's given you the armor. It is available. If you don't realize that the devil has his schemes and that he is planning an attack, if not constantly attacking, you won't necessarily put the armor on. But it's there so that you can take your stand and be prepared. If you knew that next week was going to be a week like Job, how much would it take you to put the armor on? Right? If you had advance warning, how well would you be prepared for that attack? We would, certainly. No, none of us would want to go through it. So Satan lulls us into this false sense of safety, like there's nothing coming, when there is. How do we apply it? This week, become more aware of the tactics of the devil. What are his tactics? How does he work with you? Where does he get you? What thoughts does he work in? Right? You got to know what your weaknesses are, because he'll play your game, but he'll play it better. So what's the main thing? If he is the adversary and the accuser, pay attention to the temptation of accusation and blame. When we're accusing, when we're blaming, we're joining the devil in his work. Does that make sense? Be aware of negative self-talk. When you run yourself down, that's accusation, is it not? Who did you just join? Be aware of running down people instead of lifting them up. Well, I'm just trying to help you out. No, you're criticizing. Be aware of your pride and selfishness. Is that not the main sources of sin? Realize where your weaknesses are. Choose to put on the armor daily so that you can take your stand. It doesn't matter if you put on your armor and you don't take your stand. And remember that God cannot protect you if you choose to join the accuser in his schemes. Maybe that's the one thing that I think we can all take from this, is that God can't protect us if we're going to work with the devil. If we're going to do things that are the way that the devil does things, God can't protect us. That's why people hurt one another. Because we join in the tactics of the devil. Rather than love and encouragement and defending one another, it's accusation and blame and insecurities and the rest of the things that the devil uses to knock us down. But if we know the devil and his schemes, we can change that, and we can do better, and we can join God in his work. Next week we continue with verse 13, with the call to stand and the need to put on some of the armor. Oh, the full armor. He says that a couple times in here. Put on the full armor. And the reminder that if some of it's missing, that you're not protected.
Let's pray together. Our Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you for the time we have to worship you as a part of the body, as a group. We appreciate the encouragement